Hello, I'm Rida Fakhri with our weekly look inside Syria. It's been messy from the start, but now the battle for Syria has been further complicated by the official involvement of Al-Qaeda with one of the major rebel groups fighting the government in Damascus. On Wednesday, the head of Al-Nusra Front in Syria formally pledged allegiance to the Al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri. The establishment of Al-Nusra was announced in January of 2012. Like Al-Qaeda, it has used car bombs and suicide attacks in its efforts to bring down the Assad government. The group is estimated to have around 5,000 members, believed to be largely funded and trained by Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Let's discuss these latest developments with our guests. In with you, Mr. Safi. What everyone has long suspected is now out in the open. Last year, when the United States government put the Al-Nusra Front on its list of terrorist organizations, your leadership, Muaz al-Khatib, sharply criticized the U.S. for this decision. In fact, even asked the administration to rescind its decision. Now, Al-Nusra has pledged allegiance to Al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri. What is your position? Do you condone or do you condemn this alliance?
No, we condemn, we reject it completely. Everybody in the opposition wish that they would not hear that news because of the complication of the situation in Syria. But definitely we have a big problem by the announcement and the allegiance to al-Zawahiri and Al-Qaeda.
But are you ready to denounce Al-Nusra? Are you ready to break your collaboration with this group, given what we now know, that they have sworn allegiance to Al-Qaeda?
Well, Mr. Khatib, the head of the coalition, has made it clear that their way is away from ours. I mean, there is no way to connect. Now, the challenge is how to deal with the situation, given the complexity and the fact that we have now a major terrorist organization, which is the forces of Al-Assad. We have to deal with that.
But hold on for a moment, though. Muaz al-Khatib had once described them as brothers in arms fighting for the same cause. It is clear now that Al-Nusra shares the Al-Qaeda ideology. It's one thing to denounce and criticize the Al-Qaeda ideology. It's quite another to denounce Al-Nusra. Are you ready to break your collaboration with them, or is it going to be business as usual?
Well, let me put it this way. Now, when Mr. Khatib and, in fact, George Sabra as well have said these are our brothers, they have not really declared themselves to be part of Al-Qaeda. And to be honest with you, most people in the opposition didn't know who they are.
But the question is, now they have. Are you willing now to take a different position?
Absolutely. That's what I said.
What
absolutely.
Is it? What is your position now?
The position has to be discussed. I mean, the strategy has to be discussed. But what we have made it clear, since they made the announcement, that this is unacceptable. We don't accept any group fighting with the opposition that have allegiance to Al-Qaeda.
Well, Louay Safi, how much more complicated does it make the situation from your perspective within the Syrian National Coalition? You keep asking for more weapons, but how can you guarantee that you'll be able to, in fact, control the flow of weapons away from these radical groups?
It will make it more complicated, but let us understand the situation. Now, the Nusra is outside of the FSA. FSA is the mainstream, the main fighting force. Nusra is about 5,000 as opposed
because some people would argue that the
90,000.
FSA, the First Syrian Army, doesn't in fact exist, that it's an umbrella organization, a label that very many people say they belong to, but it doesn't have a unified command structure, does it?
It exists as any guerrilla organization exists. It's not like a formal military force with high military discipline. That's true. But it's a force that has come together and worked together and subject to certain rules. Now, the question is now, I mean, what happened now underscore the importance of providing real support to the mainstream fighting force. That has been really denied, and the United States have limited the amount of weapons that the mainstream fighters can receive. While, on the other hand, the Nusra is very well funded. We don't know where the money comes from. We don't know even the names of the leaders of that organization. But the mainstream forces are not well-funded.
Fine, you talk about these mainstream forces, the so-called Free Syrian Army, but they themselves have admitted that they collaborate with Al-Nusra in the common fight to topple the Assad government. Are you in fact not being opportunistic? And won't this opportunism come back to haunt you eventually if the Assad government falls? Doesn't it alienate large segments of Syrian society, which is very much nationalistic, multi-religious? Doesn't it also alienate Western powers, your supporters?
Not really. I mean, we have a clear vision in the opposition about what we want to do. We don't want a religious state, that's for sure. The FSA has, not the FSA as a leadership and structure, but certain forces within the FSA has collaborated with the Nusra in the past. But 2 days ago, the spokesman of the FSA said clearly that this announcement will end all kind of collaboration, because any force that has allegiance to Al-Qaeda that is located outside the borders of Syria will not be a credible fighting force for us.
And how much of a big problem is it, Louay Safi, for the Syrian National Coalition? How much do you still need Jabhat al-Nusra despite all of this, given the fact that estimates suggest that it represents over 50% of the armed capacity of any of the groups fighting in Syria today?
This estimate is completely wrong. They are probably less than 10% of the total fighting force.
Well, not in terms of numbers, but in terms of the potency that they represent, the organization, the discipline, and so on.
They are effective, and the FSA is trying to improve its effectiveness. The problem, as the general pointed out, our allies have been very reluctant to support, while the allies of the real terrorists in Syria, the Assad regime, is providing a lot of support. And remember, we have now the Hezbollah and the Iranian radicals coming to Syria. And so that creates the sectarian environment where Al-Nusra can rise. But I can tell you...
How divergent are your goals? Do you share any of the same goals?
No. Actually, well, I mean, you have to distinguish between two things. On the level of our vision for Syria as a mainstream opposition is completely different than the Al-Nusra that has a very limited, and as I said, the religious state will not be acceptable in Syria, number one. Number two, we will not condone the type of tactics used by Al-Qaeda elsewhere. I mean, Jabhat al-Nusra will have to tone down, and it has, as pointed out, its own approach. Now, for us, while we disagree on their vision and on their commitments, we are not in a position to turn this fighting into internal fighting among the opposition. It has to be fixed against the regime. When the regime is gone, I can tell you, unlike Iraq, the Nusra will disappear, because it's a very small part of the entire population.
We'll see if it disappears.
And we have a different population.
Easier said than done, though. But I take the point that you do not share the same goals. Your goals are a pluralistic, democratic Syria. Theirs is an Islamic state. I do want to, if I can, just take the point to General Keane.
One final point. The Syrian population is different than the Iraqi population. And the positioning of Al-Nusra is different than the positioning of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And so the comparison is very faulty. I don't think Syria will mirror Iraq in any way.
Just note, we'll have to leave our discussion. Let me thank all our guests, Louay Safi here in the studio, and thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Syria. Remember, you can always keep up to date with the latest news on Syria at our website at aljazeera.com. From me, Rida Fakhri, and the team, thanks for watching.